All right, today we're diving into a part of the Constitution that has gone from a dusty old footnote in a history book to a front-page headline. We're talking about the 10th Amendment.
Yeah, just think about that. For decades, this thing was basically hiding in a quiet corner, something only academics really talked about. But now, it has roared back into public life. It's suddenly at the very heart of some of America's biggest, most heated political fights.
So, what is it, really? And why is it causing such a stir all of a sudden? Well, that's what we're going to figure out. We'll look at what it actually says, where it came from, and most importantly, how it's become this ultimate weapon in the constant tug-of-war between state and federal power.
Okay, so first things first. What exactly does this amendment say?
On the surface, it sounds pretty straightforward, right? It's basically saying, look, if the Constitution doesn't hand a specific power over to the federal government and it doesn't forbid the states from having that power, then it belongs to the states, or to us, the people. This single sentence is the bedrock of what's called federalism, this whole idea that power in the U.S. is split, divided between the national government D.C. and all the individual state governments.
But to really get why this is so important, we've got to rewind. Go all the way back to the beginning. Because this amendment, it wasn't some last-minute addition. No way. It was a crucial piece of the puzzle, a core part of the deal that even made the United States possible.
You see, when the country was just getting started, there was this massive tug-of-war. On one side, you had the Federalists. Think Alexander Hamilton. They were all about a strong central government, arguing it was the only way the new nation would survive. But on the other side, you had the anti-Federalists, people like George Mason. And they were terrified of a powerful central government. They thought it would just stomp all over the states and their individual freedoms. So the 10th Amendment, that was the big compromise. It was the promise made to the anti-Federalists, basically saying, hey, don't worry, we're putting a leash on this new federal government.
And yet, for a really, really long time, it didn't do a whole lot. The Supreme Court itself, in 1941, pretty much shrugged it off, calling it but a truism, which is just a fancy way of saying, yeah, we know, it's obvious, but it doesn't really have any legal teeth. It was just a reminder, not a real weapon states could use. But that was about to change in a big way.
The first real test of this whole power balance came super early on. And it was all about something that, believe it or not, is still kind of controversial, a national bank.
So check this out. The 10th Amendment gets ratified in 1791. The rules are set. Then, just a few years later, boom, Congress creates a national bank. States, especially Maryland, were absolutely furious. They saw this as the federal government just stomping all over their rights. So what does Maryland do? It decides to tax the bank, basically trying to kill it with taxes. This set the stage for a massive legal showdown that was destined for the Supreme Court.
And in this epic case, McCulloch v. Maryland, the federal government won, and it won big. The Supreme Court pointed to a part of the Constitution called the Necessary and Proper Clause. This basically says Congress can do what it needs to do to carry out its job. From this, the court established the idea of implied powers, powers that aren't spelled out word for word but are, implied. And here's the kicker. They ruled that states cannot tax or interfere with legitimate federal institutions. Chief Justice Marshall's logic was simple and powerful. The power to tax involves the power to destroy. If a state could tax a federal bank, it could kill it. And that would mean the states were more powerful than the federal government. That, he said, is a big no.
So, for like the next century and a half after that case, federal power just kept growing and growing. But then, as we get into the late 20th century, something shifts. The Supreme Court starts stepping in, kind of like a referee in this tug of war, and it starts giving the 10th Amendment some real teeth.
How'd they do it? They came up with this really important legal idea called the anti-commandeering doctrine. It sounds complicated, but the concept is actually pretty simple. The federal government cannot commandeer or hijack the states. It can't treat state governments like they're just another federal agency. Washington can't force a state's own officials to carry out federal laws.
And you can see this in action in some huge cases. The court has said, nope, Congress, you can't force a state to clean up radioactive waste your way. Or you can't just draft local cops to run background checks for you on gun purchases. And more recently, you can't stop a state from legalizing sports gambling if it wants to. Each of these decisions basically built up a firewall, protecting states from being micromanaged by the feds.
But that doesn't mean the federal government has no moves left. It has a massive tool in its toolbox: money. The feds can use federal funding as a carrot, attaching strings to it. They can say, hey, states, if you want all this cash for highways, you have to raise your drinking age to 21. But, and this is a huge but,
there is a line. The Supreme Court drew that line in the big case over the Affordable Care Act. They said the government couldn't threaten to yank all of a state's existing Medicaid funding if they didn't expand the program. That wasn't just dangling a carrot, it was a threat. It crossed the line from persuasion into, as the court called it, coercion.
Okay, so that brings us right up to today. Because all these legal doctrines and historical fights, they're not just in the law books anymore. They have exploded into the political arena, and they are at the center of the biggest battles happening in our country right now.
And there's a great term for what we're seeing: fair weather federalism. It perfectly captures this totally predictable dance, where politicians scream about states' rights when their party is out of power in D.C. But as soon as their team wins the White House, suddenly they're all for strong federal power.
I mean, the pattern is impossible to miss. Look at the Obama years. Republican-led states, especially Texas, were constantly suing the federal government over things like health care and immigration. Then the script flips. Trump becomes president, and suddenly it's Democratic states like California leading the charge, suing over the environment and immigration. And now, under President Biden, you guessed it, Republican-led states are right back in court, fighting things like vaccine mandates and climate policies. It just goes to show you the 10th Amendment isn't just some abstract legal idea, it's a very real political weapon, and it's almost always wielded by whichever party is on the outside looking in.
So why should you care about any of this? Because this constitutional tug-of-war is happening all around you, every single day, shaping the rules you live by. Think about it. The wild differences in COVID rules from one state to the next. The intense legal battles over abortion access and travel post-Roe. So-called sanctuary cities that limit cooperation with federal immigration enforcement. How you can buy legal marijuana in one state, but it's still a federal crime. These aren't random policy debates. They are all, at their core, 10th Amendment fights.
And all of this leaves us with a really big, fundamental question about how our country works. As we face these huge, national, even global challenges, pandemics, climate change, you name it, is this built-in, constant struggle between the states and the federal government a good thing? Is it a vital protection for our liberty? Or is it a paralyzing flaw that makes it impossible to tackle our biggest problems? How we answer that question, well, that's going to shape the future of the entire American experiment.